Hey again, woodworkers. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you about doors, and there's a lot that goes into doors, but they're not scary. They're just, you understand the process, you'll be fine. Two basic formats of doors. There are basic overlay door here, which means that the door overlays or covers the framework of your carcass. So this is an overlay door here, mounted in very much the same way. You've got butt hinges that you'll see here, which we'll talk about in upcoming videos, but these are just fine. Sometimes the application of these would be better used for an inlay door, which is what we'll talk about next, but you need to know that these are two ways of mounting doors. One downside of this style is that you need to consider the hardware for mounting these doors. We can use screws that we can put into the carcass and have a little concern about the length of that screw, but for the thickness of this door, and we're hoping for around 3/4 of an inch, it gets a little bit tight for what we can do for the length of that screw. If it's a 3/4 inch door, then you'll be fine. If it's a little bit less than that, you start running into some trouble. So, hinges here, overlay door. The other one is going to be an inset door, which we see here. And the inset door, butt hinges, but you'll see the frame of this carcass, and then the door will function very much the same way. This one I still need to tweak a little bit more, but this is the idea. Two main differences. So in the first door that I showed you, we have, and all of these to start, these are all in the frame and panel style. So that means that the door has a frame, there's a panel that goes inside of that frame, thus the name frame and panel. And there's nothing new about this. There's a couple different variations of these things, but we should talk about those, we should discuss. So with this style of door, there is a radius or a curve that creates that raised element. And the raise traditionally means that this panel is proud of the frame. You can still have a raised panel door without having it proud of the frame, but it has that look. So these are the concepts. You'll notice on the interior of this door that it is recessed a bit. So that's what you'll typically find in a raised panel door, and that's what that one looks like. The other door here in the inset have a similar raised element. It's very proud of the frame, but instead of that radius section here, we have a chamfer. So 45-degree or whatever the geometry is that got you to this place, and it has a decent look. I guess the one piece of advice I would acknowledge or recognize or offer would be that the raised element here should pick up on some of the elements of your overall design. If you have curves in your piece, then maybe something with a radius makes a little more sense. Maybe it has a bit more continuity. Something with a bit more geometry involved with your design, maybe something in this realm is a better option. Both of these are fairly prominent features on the doors. This also is in a similar concept, but this panel now is on the same plane as the frame of the door. Just different features, different things to think about, and how you design and build these things. The one distinction that I should point out here with this door is that this is the right way to approach this from a building standpoint. You'll notice that there is finish already applied on the panel. Whenever you're using a solid wood panel, you always, before you assemble the door together, you've always got to finish the panel first and then assemble everything later. The reason being, with solid wood, it's going to expand and contract. If you don't have this thing finished, it's going to contract and have this really nasty halo on the two edges that are not going to be finished, and there's no way to get in there and easily finish those. So if you are going to use a solid panel, make sure to finish it, and you'll have to finish the exterior as well as the interior for your doors. Okay, so raised panels, great. transitioning into other options. So, built in the exact same construction methods, we've got a solid wood panel, but this way it's a bit more of a shaker style where it has this recessed area from the frame. And so there's a different look. There's no detail here that would visually detract or create shadow. And so this is an option. On the interior of this door, in order to maximize some of that thickness of this panel, any of that extension happens inside of the door, not on the outside. So this is more of a shaker door, and then we have that. And then lastly, there is a third option here. Whenever we get into larger doors, these are all relatively small sizes, but if we get into a really large door, the length here is the critical factor. You need to consider the stability of this panel. If this thing is going to start to shrink or twist or warp or any movement at all, you're always going to have better success with a thicker panel than that of a thinner one. I think everybody has gone through the temptation of thinking that a 1/4 inch panel is enough thickness if you just wanted to have a shaker, until you start milling something down to that 1/4 inch and realize, oh no, this is no longer flat, and I can no longer run over a joint to a plane or hand plane to fix it. I've already reached my minimum thickness. So in order to keep this piece stable, having the look that a shaker might require, you see some of this extension that happens both on the interior, so you have the shadow all the way around, shadow all the way around here as well. So this we have close to the thickness of our door material, which is 3/4 of an inch, as I said. This is a little bit shy of 3/4. So with this one, you'll notice that there's a gap left and right, and there's also a gap top and bottom. It would look really out of balance if there was a gap on the sides, which has to be there for seasonal movement, but there was no gap top and bottom. It would just feel like something was missed, something was forgotten. So keep that in mind. If you are going to go with something like this, even if you don't see it on the front, it will exist on the interior or the back. Make sure that whatever movement gap you've allowed for, make sure that you echo that top and bottom as well. It's just aesthetics, but it's important. This is a really well-fitting inset door. The thing that I wanted to point out here is that there's an added feature in that there's a stop on the interior of the cabinet, and what you can't see is that there is a magnet that is drilled in the back of the door. There is a corresponding magnet drilled in the interior of this piece here. So you don't see the magnet from the front, but this will do a nice job of keeping this thing closed, and sometimes that's really important. Sometimes these things start to get a mind of their own, which is not helpful. So, okay, so all of these are frame and panel. These are the broad strokes of this. I'm going to talk about joinery here shortly, but there's one other version that seems to be more common. So this is a slab style door, and slab style is just the appearance of a flat board, and that's great. If I were to make this door out of just a solid board, I've got to worry about two things. Even if it were a glue up, I have to worry about the movement, but I also have to worry about how flat this door is going to maintain over perpetuity. So I would not recommend doing these things out of solid wood. This one has been veneered, which I recommend, because you can control both of the concerns, the movement and maintaining flatness with this. And so what I've done is I have a substrate of MDF. I have then framed around the perimeter with solid wood. I've done that for a couple of reasons. Number one is if I have a really great looking veneer, I open this thing up, see edge of MDF. To me, the piece immediately gets really cheap, and it just doesn't work aesthetically. There's also a practical standpoint from this as well. If I'm mounting hinges into this door so that it functions in the same way that you've seen with these, if I'm going to screw into MDF, that's only a limited period of time for that until those screws start to pull or become compromised. So screwing into solid wood is a much better option. And so by doing this format, I've achieved both of those concerns. What you can't see here is that the way I wrapped this around, there's two different ways to do this, and I would argue that one is better than the other. It'd be really easy for me to glue a top piece on, this is before the veneer, gluing a top piece on and then a bottom piece, clamping those together, cutting a straight edge here, and then gluing edges into place. Once those are set, then I can veneer the faces. The problem with that is that you'll notice, you'll see from the ends of this board end grain here and here, and I just don't like the way that feels. It's a lot easier, but I don't love it because I think that you're always going to notice these things. It's subtle, but they don't have a relationship to what the veneer is showing you on the front. It's a lot easier to accept that this is going in the wrong orientation from that of the grain of the veneer. It's just a way that I think suggests a little bit more of a finished look. Instead, what I recommend is whatever the dimension of your MDF, and we don't need a great deal of material here. I think an inch, 1.5 inches, that's plenty. 2 inches, maybe overkill. 3/4 you could probably get away from, or get away with. But it doesn't, you don't need a great deal of material here is the takeaway. What I do need to think about though is the math to figure out what dimension this needs to be in relationship to the carcass this is going to be fit into. Because if I need to start trimming off after I've already set the hinges, if I start to need to trim one side, then that miter that we've worked really carefully to hide, and this matches fairly well, you're going to start to see a little bit more, and I know you can't quite pick this up, but a little bit more of the top miter is exposed than the edge miter, and that's going to be typical. So I'm going to try to get this as close as I can to the inside opening, with the understanding that I'm going to have to trim this down a bit when I start fitting. And so those are the things to consider, and those are your door options for the most part. There's a lot to be said about making of the doors. The fitting of the doors, I would say, is where the fun is and where the challenge is. So before we get to the fitting, let me talk to you about how to build these things in the next video. But these are your door options. Best of luck.